Welcome everybody to the first ever British Pharmaceutical Students Association virtual SEP. My name is Sebastian Bailey and I'm the IPSF officer for the BPSA. I'm so excited that so many of you have a strong interest in this session. We've had an absolutely incredible 900 signups for today. We will definitely be uploading the recording to our YouTube channel in the next few days. And I think it's incredible that so many people from so many different places have joined us. So to celebrate that, if you can, and if you're willing to, please can you turn on your webcams for the duration of the session? And please may you also keep your microphones muted for the duration of the session, unless you're asking a question in our Q&A session at the end. So today you'll be learning a lot about pharmacy in Great Britain, as well as the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation, or IPSF, and that's the organization that makes the Student Exchange Program possible. So if this is the first IPSF activity that you've been involved with, I just want to remind you that SEP is just one activity of dozens that IPSF offers, and we'll be going into more detail about this later on in the session. So I really recommend that after the webinar, you follow the IPSF social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you've enjoyed learning about the BPSA and the work we do, I recommend you do the same for the BPSA social media accounts. And I will share these links at the end of the webinar, and they'll also be in the video description if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description down below. So for now, I'll pass the floor on to Daniel MacDonald, who is the current Student Exchange Officer of the BPSA, to chair the session. Daniel.
Thank you, Seb, for the introduction. So, hi everyone, I'm Daniel MacDonald and I'm the Student Exchange Officer for the BPSA in the UK for the 2020 and 2021 mandate. So I was appointed as the Student Exchange Officer in December, and I've had a really great experience in the role. I've really enjoyed working with the other Student Exchange Officers across the globe, as well as reviewing amazing Student Exchange Programme applications for this summer. Many of you here today may have even applied for the Student Exchange Programme in the UK yourself, or perhaps you're just curious about pharmacy in the UK. Either way, I'm sure today will be a great experience for you to learn about UK pharmacy from some amazing speakers. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Student Exchange Programme, it's IPSF's largest scheme where each year IPSF members can experience pharmacy placements in more than 80 different countries across the world. As well as this, you're able to travel and explore that country, and depending on your host country, you might even experience some social events too. For more information about this, do visit the IPSF website and search for the Student Exchange Programme, and the next batch of applications will begin next winter. So before we begin, since there's so many of you from across the world here, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear from some of you in the chat function. So if you'd be able to type it in the chat, your country and one thing you'd hope to learn from today, that would be really, really amazing. I'd love to see how many countries we've got here with us today. And it could be just, one small thing you hope to learn or why you've joined today, but I'll give you like a few minutes just to type that in the chat. There's quite a lot coming in. There we go. Amazing. Well, there's so many coming in. I was planning on reading a few, but it's going so quickly. I'll probably just sort of like let you guys take a quick look yourselves. But it's great to see how many countries we've got here and how many nationalities are represented, and hopefully you'll enjoy the event. So welcome to today's event. It's BPSA's first ever virtual student exchange programme. Although it was disappointing that we were unable to host students in person this winter, hosting the event online has meant that such a large number of you have been able to attend today who may otherwise not have been able to, which is really great to see. So the agenda for today will be a talk by Hera Ali giving an introduction to IPSF. Then we'll have Omar Bahati, who'll discuss community pharmacy in the UK. Then there'll be Regan McCarhill giving a talk on the upcoming field of GP pharmacy, which is general practice pharmacy. Afterwards, there'll be Matthew Brown talking about hospital pharmacy, and then Matthew Michael discussing industrial pharmacy. And then finally, to end, there'll be a Q&A panel discussion with the speakers. So firstly, we'll begin with a talk from Hera. A little background on Hera. She began her journey with BPSA as a BPSA national representative for many years, before then working towards more prestigious roles within IPSF. She's been a local exchange officer and then was on the Public Health Committee, before then becoming the IPSF Public Health Advocacy Coordinator. And now, as well as being a hospital pharmacist, she's also the IPSF chairperson of Public Health. So over to you, Hera, if you're able to share your screen or just get started, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for the introduction. So hi, everyone. My name is Hera. I am the current IPSF chairperson of Public Health. So today I'll just be giving a bit of an introduction into IPSF if this is your first IPSF event or you don't really know much about IPSF. So IPSF is the leading international advocacy organisation for pharmacy and pharmaceutical sciences students and recent graduates. So we promote improving public health through the provision of information, education, networking, and a range of publications and professional initiatives. So IPSF, just a bit of kind of background about IPSF. So it was formed actually in London in 1949 with just 8 countries, and it's actually the oldest university student international organisation. We currently represent more than 500,000 pharmacy and pharmaceutical science students and recent graduates from over 100 countries worldwide. So this is kind of our IPSF structure, just to give you a bit of an idea. So we have the executive committee, which has the positions you can see on the screen. So we have the Secretariat, President, President-elect, Secretary General, Treasurer, etc. And then you can see we also have Public Health, which is my position. We then have 5 regional offices. So we have the African Regional Office, the Asia Pacific Regional Office, the Eastern Mediterranean Regional Office, the European Regional Office, and the Pan American Regional Office. We then have different portfolios, which I'll kind of go over briefly, which consist of coordinators and committee members. And each of the regional offices also have a regional working group, who then have a subcommittee under them. Aside from all of this, we also have an advisory board and an auditing committee. So as mentioned, we do have 5 regional offices. So because there's so many of you here today, then you'll probably definitely fit into these regional offices. And all of them do have like a Facebook page and a website. So if you're from any of these regions, you can also check which region you fall into on the IPSF website. So the IPSF Secretariat head office is co-located with the International Pharmaceutical Federation in The Hague, which is in the Netherlands. So usually we have our executive meetings here, but unfortunately because of COVID, they've all kind of been virtual, but normally we would have our executive meetings here 3 times a year. So there's loads of IPSF events coming up this year, and hopefully, given the pandemic, we hopefully will be able to have some of these in person. So kind of the biggest event that occurs in IPSF is World Congress, which is due to be held in Seoul, Korea. We also have loads of regional symposia as well. So each of the regional offices will hold an event. And you can see on the screen, we have AFPS, which is the African Pharmaceutical Symposium, which is due to be held in Mali. Then we've got the Asia Pacific APPS, which is Asia Pacific Pharmaceutical Symposium, which is meant to be held in the Philippines. And all of these do have Facebook pages. So if you're interested in attending any of these events, then do check out their pages on Facebook to find out kind of what's going on and whether or not these will be held in person or not. You don't have to be from that region to attend the symposia. There is some allocation for international attendees as well, so don't be put off if it's just not in your region. So aside from all of this as well, we kind of have a few main focuses in IPSF. So we have a pharmacy education portfolio, professional development, public health, student exchange, as was mentioned earlier, and we also have policy and advocacy. So there's quite a lot in IPSF aside from the student exchange. So the pharmacy education portfolio focuses on a few things: pharmaceutical sciences, advocacy, internships, pharmaceutical practice, and we have a few magazines as well, Pen and the Future magazine. So the pharmacy education portfolio kind of aims to, you know, educate, hold webinars, research on pharmaceutical topics. So anything that's related to kind of, you know, being a pharmacist in the future. We also work a lot with FIP to improve pharmacy education as well. We also have a Young Researchers Forum, which you can access through the IPSF website, where you can submit topic ideas and you know, research opportunities on that forum as well. We then have the professional development portfolio, which again has loads of different events, as you can see on the screen. So there's the pharmacy profession awareness campaign, we've got the patient counselling event, clinical skills event, compounding event, and the industry skills event. All of these are kind of competitions that take place, and each of the member organizations are able to hold these competitions. So if you're interested in getting involved in any of these competitions, then reach out to your contact person in IPSF or whoever's lead of your member organization, and I'm sure they'll be able to give you a bit more information about how to take part in these activities. We also have the Leaders in Training program and the Trainers Development Camp. So these are really great opportunities for you to get involved in IPSF on a local level. So by attending the LIT or the TDC, you're able to become a trainer, which means that you can then be involved in any training opportunities that IPSF offers. So I myself attended the Trainers Development Camp in Warsaw, which is kind of one of the pictures. I'm not in that picture, but it's one of the pictures. And then after that, we actually ran a trainers development camp, which is a picture on the right, which is from Taiwan. So being able to become a trainer, especially right now, given the pandemic, some of the TDCs will be held online. Some of them will be in person as well. I'll kind of go into a bit more detail towards the end of my presentation, but this is kind of one of the really good ways that you can get involved in IPSF. And if you really enjoy sharing skills with other people, teaching other people different skills, especially soft skills, which aren't really emphasized in our pharmacy curricula. So getting involved in these activities is a really great way to kind of get more involved in IPSF. And then we have public health, which is my portfolio. So in public health, we have three main areas of work. We have the activities, humanitarian, and advocacy work. So we hold campaigns all throughout the year with our public health committee, and we also take part in WHO events as well. We serve as a focal point I serve as a focal point for WHO, and therefore any WHO events such as the Executive Board, which recently happened, or World Health Assembly, are all events that we get invited to by the WHO, and we're able to have a delegation there. So these are just a couple of the things that have been going on this year in the public health portfolio. So on the left of the screen, you can see a poster for the Global AMR Youth Summit, which was held with 4 other student healthcare organizations. And it was a really great event that we held towards the end of World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. We had loads of high-level speakers attend, and we had different workshops on events to do with One Health and kind of the One Health approach when it comes to AMR. We also had one of the other pictures on the screen you can see in the middle is from the 148th session of the Executive Board. So in this session, we were able to present 3 statements on AMR, immunization, and also expanding access to effective treatments for cancer and rare and orphan diseases. So we were able to advocate for pharmacists and pharmacy students while presenting these statements and kind of advocating for the role of pharmacists in, for example, immunization, especially now that we have like the COVID vaccine. We also have on the right-hand side, you can see 2 images of 2 webinars that we've held recently, which are from the humanitarian sector. So that was a lot about, how you can become a humanitarian pharmacist, kind of what you need to do to get there. And also we had a webinar recently about human rights and how you can get more involved in human rights advocacy. And we heard from some really great speakers. In the middle, you can see there was a webinar as well on COVID-19. So earlier at the beginning of the pandemic, we held a webinar we had an interregional campaign, and throughout that we had each of the regions presenting different topics. So we had webinars on kind of just COVID itself, but also kind of the economical impact of COVID, also the health impact of COVID, and also medication regulatory and development, which is something that was quite new at the beginning of the pandemic. So these are all activities that were open to the IPSF members, and anyone could take part in them, anyone could join them. And so it's really important to kind of keep an eye out for these kind of events because it's a great way to get involved. We then have the Student Exchange Programme, which has kind of been mentioned already. So it's the leading exchange programme offering pharmacy-focused internships all over the world. So about 1,000 students go on exchange each year when there's not a pandemic happening. We have more than 80 associations worldwide that participate in SEP, and there's loads of areas in which you can take part in SEP. So you can do community pharmacy, research, hospital, pharmaceutical industry, a lot of the topics that you'll be hearing about later in this webinar. So we also do a lot on policy and advocacy. So a lot of people are quite don't really understand when we talk about policy and advocacy, but the purpose of us advocating for pharmacy students and future pharmacists is to ensure that we can really represent our members. So we do represent over 500,000 we represent over 500,000 members. So it's really important that we're able to advocate for issues where we believe that pharmacists should be involved, pharmacy students should be involved, young people should be involved. So a lot of our work also occurs on the policy and advocacy platform. So you can see a few pictures from the WHO, which is the World Health Assembly. You can see a picture with the Director General on the left-hand side. And we've also got a lot of policy booklets and policy initiatives that we've released recently. One of them was on AMR, and the biggest one that we had not last year, the GA before, was a vaccine hesitancy toolkit. And all of these are available for our members to use and kind of to utilize on a local level. We also have quite a few allied organizations that we work with. So you can see on the screen that we work with a range of different organizations, and these are not it. We work with a lot more as well. So from like the United Nations, WHO, where we have official relations. We also work with other student healthcare organizations such as IPSF, which is the International Federation of Medical Student Associations. We also work with the World Health Students Alliance, which also represent other student organizations such as the veterinary students, the dentistry students as well. So kind of to end off my presentation, I kind of wanted to give a few pointers as to how you can get more involved in IPSF if you're either new or you don't really know where to get started, because it can be quite daunting. Every year we, around September time, we hold a call for the IPSF team. So this allows you to get involved in not only the areas that I've mentioned already. So for example, professional development, pharmacy education. There's also loads more portfolios as well, such as external relations, internal relations. And this is a great opportunity to get involved in those areas. And we also release loads of projects and calls on Facebook. And if you have a contact person of your member organization, they will also receive all these information. So we always are offering internships for different organizations. Currently, we have one going, a volunteering opportunity with FIP. We also release calls for being a part of the IPSF delegation to high-level events. So at the moment, we have applications open to be a part of the delegation to attend the 74th World Health Assembly, which is due to take place in Geneva, but obviously given the pandemic, we're not really sure if it'll be online or not. However, that is open at the moment and applications end on the 6th of February. So always make sure to check our social media pages because we always announce it there. You can also, as mentioned earlier, you can get involved in IPSF by becoming a trainer. So you can do this by attending a trainer's development camp. And on the bottom, I've kind of inserted 2 pictures of the TDCs that are due to happen this year. So there's one happening in Portugal, which is actually occurring on like the 12th of February. So that one you can't really apply for, but there is one happening by Afro in Sierra Leone as well. And then there's also due to be one in Mexico as well. So if any of these are held online, you are open to apply for them and join them. So don't be put off. And even if, and it also kind of, the pandemic gives a bit of an excuse, because it means that you don't have to travel anywhere to become a trainer. You can do it online. That's if they get held online. And these are all publicized on the regional pages, on the regional social media pages. So yeah, that's kind of it for my presentation. On the screen, you can see our social media handles. So if you want to know more information about IPSF, or you kind of just want to learn a little bit about the work that we get up to, then make sure to follow our social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, we have a website, we have Twitter, YouTube. We don't have TikTok yet, but I'm trying to convince people to get TikTok. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hera. That was really very insightful and a really great introduction to IPSF for everyone that is either new or just know too much about the Federation. So we'll now move on to Omar Bahassi, who'll be discussing community pharmacy. So a quick introduction. Omar studied at UCL in London before then training in southwest of Greater London in a large independent community pharmacy. He then qualified and has become a locum pharmacist ever since, which I'm sure he'll explain in more detail in his talk. Alongside this, he's worked with BPSA and EPSA and has set up a student placements program. Now over to you, Omar.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you see me?
Can indeed.
Oh dear, never mind. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen so you can see my slides. Bear with me. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Yep, nice one. Okay, so I'm going to give you a view of community pharmacy from the point of view of a locum pharmacist. So a locum pharmacist basically provides cover where the regular pharmacist is on holiday or ill, or maybe on maternity leave for a good few months. So you can be like a quasi manager for a bit. But basically, the main thing is it forces you to experience community pharmacy in all different settings. So you don't get sort of stuck in one aspect of just one small pharmacy in one place. It forces you geographically into different areas, different parts of the country, and it forces you into slightly different settings. So I suppose that puts me in a good situation to talk about all the places that exist. There we go. So where is community pharmacy? The honest answer is everywhere. Anywhere that can sustain the business model, and you know there's a healthcare need to be met, you can find a pharmacy. So when you see one in England, you know, what are you going to come across? So there's an old-fashioned view that perhaps it's something out of Sherlock Holmes or Poirot or something like that, but that traditional sort of quaint view of community pharmacies almost completely gone. If you look really hard, you might find a pharmacy like this with a, you know, lots of, sort of polished wood, and behind sort of lots of things in glass bottles, and there is a weighing scale there on the left side. But things have moved on. So if you were to fly to the UK, the first place I suppose you'd see a pharmacy is probably at the airport. Can you all see that? Yep, brilliant. So this is probably the first place. This is the first place you're probably going to see a pharmacy. So here's a view from, it's a stock image. So before Boots come after me, these are all publicly available images off the internet. So I know Boots are very sensitive about taking pictures of their pharmacy. So this is just a stock image. And you can see above, you know, the airport information and the flights and what have you. So this is probably the first pharmacy that you're going to see when you land. And you can see it's very much focused on the retail side of it. You've got your sandwiches, and in the middle, slightly to the left, you can probably see some yellow bottles, they're sun creams, and on the far right, you've got your international travel plugs and what have you. Hidden at the back, there's an area for your medicines, and there's a dispensary, but the main focus is very much on sort of bits and pieces for for travel. I mean, they're branded as health and beauty, so you can expect it to be more of a retail aspect. You're unlikely to see the same customer twice, yeah, and what have you. So it's very much a sort of transient. So that's a main sort of travel hub. And then you've got also, if you were to leave the airport, probably on the train, so let's say we're going into London, that's probably the next place you're going to see a pharmacy. This is another travel hub. This is London Liverpool Street Station. So if you flew into, say, Stansted, you get off the train here in central London. And again, you can see it says beauty above the entranceway. And you've got your main concourse. And it's, again, a very kind of airport feel. You know how modern stations are these days. And it's very retail focused. Now, I've worked at this particular one. This is Boots, London Liverpool Street. And there is a dispensary, believe it or not, tucked away at the back. But again, the main thrust of the stores is sort of the retail side of it, you know, bits and pieces you can sell. Central London, you can imagine there's lots of emphasis on, there's a Clarins counter there, lots of emphasis on high value makeup and cosmetics. So again, you're unlikely to see the same customer or patient twice. It's again a very transient population. So let's move on to another large retail aspect. So shopping malls, really since the 90s, these have kind of taken off. Again, a very retail aspect to it. Probably going to see people a bit more often, but again, it's very much a retail aspect. You know, makeup and what have you. It isn't necessarily the most traditional view of pharmacy, but I have worked at places like this and they do have a role. And then the last kind of really famous retail aspect is the out of town retail units. And I've worked at, not this particular one, this is in Essex, but I've worked at one in another part of Essex, and they are almost like spaceships that have just been dropped. They're very kind of American out of town feel. Again, it's very retail orientated, and you might see the same person twice if you're there for a few weeks, but probably not. And again, you can see it's branded health and beauty. So same sort of idea, you know, cosmetics and sort of sandwiches and other bits and pieces, but not the traditional view of pharmacy, but you know, there is a role for them. Now, the next image is a supermarket pharmacy, and I've done a lot of work, including maternity cover at supermarket pharmacies. I think this is the demarcation point. This is the point where you really do start to get regular customers, regular patients, and the retail aspect of it is less so, and it's more kind of clinical and medicines, and you start developing more of a relationship with the local GP surgeries, and you know, a few of the sort of the vets might pop in, or the dentists, and you do really see the same people. Well, they do their shopping, say, once a week or twice a week, so you're seeing the same customers over and over. You know people's names a bit more. The GPs might pop in to do their food shopping or what have you. So now we're getting into something that feels a bit more like, you know, the traditional community pharmacy type of feel. So I remember when I first locumed at Tesco Pharmacy, it was a bit of a sort of peculiar experience where all the sort of customers and patients are lined up, and you can see here there's like a trolley, and all of their trolleys were outside the pharmacy sort of counter, and I just felt this is a bit odd, but it takes a bit of getting used to. But there is a role for these kind of pharmacies. I know in some places in the world this is totally peculiar. To have a pharmacy in the supermarket is really odd. When I've been to other countries, they've kind of given me a funny stare, like, how is that possible? But it is literally everywhere. All sorts of places where, you know, the public need access to pharmaceutical care and advice. It's especially, I think, since the late 90s when the rules were started to be relaxed. I mean, obviously I wasn't qualified then, but yeah, things have loosened up. So you'll notice it says above where the lady's standing with the small kids, it says open till late, and they really are. I mean, when I was locuming at a Tesco pharmacy a lot, it was sort of starting at 6:30 in the morning. I'd start my shift, and then I'd overlap with the afternoon pharmacist. And if I was doing the late shift, you know, I'd be there till sort of 10:30 at night or 11. So they really are very long hours, and you tend to split the shifts across different members of the team. But it is something that's growing in popularity. Still relatively new, but yeah, it's definitely got a footprint. Okay, so the next image is an example of a sort of a classic standard high street pharmacy. And I think we really are now in the territory of this is what an average member of the public thinks about. If you said to an average sort of British person, you know, where's your local pharmacy? They're probably going to think of their local main high street. And that's probably, if you come on a trip to the UK, I like to think if you're walking around, just looking around as a tourist, this is probably one of the first places you're going to sort of come across. Now, there are other areas where there are pharmacies, such as health centres. You're probably less likely to walk into one of these unless you're a patient at the surgery. But I've also done a lot of work. I used to do every, I think, Friday and Saturday morning for a good few years at a pharmacy that was in the same building as a medical practice. So this is not me being a pharmacist in the GP surgery. Just want to emphasise that that's not what it is. It's a purpose-built site. Usually, not always, but usually a purpose-built site where the GP practice and pharmacy are under the same roof, basically. But you'll still see there's an entranceway at the front for members of the public. So even if you're not a patient at that GP, at that doctor's practice, you can just be a regular member of the public and you can still access the pharmacy. So this is sort of less well known to the general public, arguably, but still definitely plays a good role. Here's another one. Here's a bit more sort of clear. So you've got the pharmacy on the right side and all the GP practice on the left and above. So again, kind of purpose-built sites for that routine, not really on high street, so you're unlikely to walk into it if you ever visit the UK. But it is something just to be aware of. And then you've got your kind of standard English or Scottish, you know, Welsh suburb. You know, so I live in the suburbs of London, and this is kind of your very, very common pharmacy. You know, it's a bit sort of plain, but I would argue that it's one of the backbones of the country. It's not sort of all shiny and glitzy like at the airport and what have you. But again, you know, you're going to really build up relationships with the same regular customers, patients. You're going to probably know all the local GPs by first name. There'll probably be a GP practice around the corner, and it's really something where you can really feel you're making a difference to a community. Like all the patients and customers come in, they're probably all going to know your name, and it's very sort of local, sort of embedded in the community type pharmacy. And I've done a lot of local work at these kind of pharmacies. Really underrated. They are, I think, the backbone that do a lot of good work for the public. And then I just wanted to point out this one, just pop this one in. I've worked at this one actually. So this is village pharmacy. So again, it's the high street, but there's loads of villages across England where, like for example, in this one, you've just got one main road, and that's really the only road that gets you through the village. It's like an old Roman road. And you've got loads of buildings here that are like ridiculously old. And you're literally the only pharmacy and therefore the only pharmacist in the village. So you really need to be on your A game, because if you've got lots of like young people who can't drive, it's one bus every 2 hours to get you out of town, and there's one GP sort of practice. You really need to sort of be on top of things. There's no backup. If you haven't got a medicine, then there's no pharmacy, there's no other pharmacy in the local area. And if a GP needs some information from the pharmacy, then it's just pretty much all on you, because you and that local doctor's surgery really provide healthcare for that entire village. So that's an interesting aspect as well. So I've worked at that one. That's in an Essex village. It's quite nice. Again, very sort of traditional pharmacy. Okay, so let's get into what the layout. What's in a pharmacy if you walk into one of these places. So I'm just going to, rather than give the layout of every single one, that's kind of, we'll be here all day. But for example, yeah, your village pharmacy, your high street pharmacy, your local pharmacy on a parade of shops. I call that the common type, like the average type. You walk in, and the first thing you see is the shop floor, what I would say the public area. So you can walk around and sort of nose around all the products, and you've got sort of in this image here on the right side, there's some sort of antacid products, and on the top there's some things for cough and cold, and in the foreground you've got some sort of shampoos and cosmetics, and on the left I think there's some support bandages if you maybe sprain your ankle or something. So that's the first area you walk into. So that's one of the kind of three main areas of how a UK pharmacy tends to be laid out, generally speaking. Okay, and then if you go to the pharmacy counter, you hopefully you're going to have some lovely members of staff, and then you've got all the kind of behind the counter medicines. So they tend to be a bit stronger. Let's have a look. And behind the counter you'll have the dispensary, and in the dispensary you're going to have stronger medicines still. You're going to have prescribed medicines, things that you don't want the average member of the public to get hold of. I've got a lot of doodles appearing on my screen. I don't know if anyone can see that. Is that?
Yeah, I can see them. They're like coming and going.
Yeah. Sorry, I was like, that's definitely not me. So I don't. I don't know. So,
should be fine. You can still see the things behind.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, that just to reassure you, that's not me doodling. I don't know where that's coming from. So yeah, so average dispensary there, and all the crucial aspects are kind of displayed apart from the sink. So you've got a fridge, and to the left of it is a cupboard. So in the fridge you've got all the medicines that got to be chilled, and then on the left side you've got all the sort of standard prescribed medicines or sort of bulk creams and what have you. On the right side you've got sort of a dispensing computer, a bench where you can get the prescriptions converted over to medicines ready to be checked, and you've got a selection of drawers there. The medicines tend to be in alphabetical order usually, the prescribed medicines, so you've got medicines to control blood pressure or to control diabetes and what have you, things that basically you really don't want the public sort of self-selecting, and you really need it prescribed by the nurse or GP or what have you. And then on the far left you've got some medicines that have been all ready and checked, and they're all bagged up, and you can see the letters there. So that's usually the patient's surname. Okay, so when the patient comes to collect the medicine, it's just easier for the staff to retrieve it and bring it to the counter. Okay, and here's another quick image. There's another dispensary there. On the right side, you can just see hiding a sink and a tap. So that's a requirement in a UK pharmacy dispensary. You need a sink, because obviously if you're making up, say, powdered antibiotics, you need a fresh source of fresh tap water to make it up correctly. And in this one here as well, you've got a couple of computers. So this is this dispensary right at the back, and you can see from here the pharmacist has got a view of the shop floor and a view of the counter there. So let's just bring those three areas together so it's a bit easier to see. So here's another pharmacy. There's the pharmacist poking his head at the back, so he's probably checking some medicines that have been perhaps dispensed, and you can see behind him sort of your rows of prescription-only medicines. And then you've got the pharmacy counter there, all the what they call the P medicines, the pharmacy medicines there. So a bit stronger stuff, so drowsy medicines, for example, or maybe stronger painkillers with, say, codeine. I know it's very different in other parts of the world. You can sell a lot of these medicines over the counter, like diazepam and codeine. It's not restricted, but in the UK there's kind of a graduated model. So you've got, for example, on the right side of the image, you can just see peeking in some nicotine replacement, I think lozenges and patches. So they're on the self-selection, and then anything a bit stronger is behind the counter, and so on and so forth. And just in case I didn't point it out, going back here into the dispensary, to the left of the fridge is the controlled drug cabinet. So in that is your sort of morphine tablets, diamorphine ampules, that kind of thing. So you're going to have a lockable cupboard in a UK dispensary, as well as a fridge and what have you. So just to re-emphasize that. So there's different levels of control depending on how strong the medicine is. Okay, so let's jump to a pharmacy with some actual people in it. So there we go, a bit easier to see. Right side, all the medicines on self-selection. There's a an older gentleman there, looks like he's investigating some, I don't know, cough medicine or something. Then you've got a lady here, looks like she's collecting some medicines that have been prescribed. But just for the sake of conversation, you can see the member of staff there is holding a document in her hand, a prescription. So let's say the lady got some medicine prescribed. So what's the story behind that? So quick run through. So a prescriber, in this case, let's just say a GP, saw the lady for some kind of ailment and prescribed some medicine. So here we go. There's what a prescription can look like. Obviously, this is for Mickey Mouse, so, you know, patient confidentiality. So this is just an example document. And here there's some cough lozenges, but it could be anything, obviously. You know, let's just say blood pressure medicine, for example, just picking the first example. So you've got sort of the medicine, the quantity, the dose, patient's details. There should be a signature there. It looks like a bit of a scroll usually. You've got a date, the prescriber stamp. So that's kind of the essentials of what, you know, you need on a prescription. I mean, I've just said a doctor's prescribed it. Obviously, you know, you get nurse prescribers, you get dentists prescribing, you get all sorts. So there we go. So the lady's handed that in, and our lady's now become a gentleman. So here's an example of the pharmacist. This is the way I like to do it. Once the medicine's made up, I like to be the one, if I can, to hand it out, because then it gives the patient a chance to talk to the pharmacist if they have some questions about the medicines. And usually the medicine's handed out bagged for a bit of privacy, and obviously we check the name and address. So in this case there might be a query because it looks like a different person, but you get the idea. I just popped this image in because a lot of pharmacies you're going to walk into are a bit like this. They're kind of like rammed to the rafters with all sorts and bits and pieces. But, you know, it is also a retail environment, and, you know, especially in London, space can be at such a premium that you can understand that they've got to use the space really efficiently. Okay, so if you were to wander around a shop floor, this is just the boots. Again, these are just stock images. You tend to find the medicines on the shop floor that you can self-select. They tend to be arranged by use. So for example, here, this is like the gastric section, like gastro type stuff. So on the left, you'll see heartburn, indigestion, on the right, diarrhea. So again, you've got your Gaviscons and what have you, and, you know, diarylites, rehydration therapy. So I've just highlighted here the gastric section. If you go into a normal pharmacy, you're going to expect a section on sort of care for the tummy, shall we say. You'd expect an area, just to pop off a few other areas, you'd expect an area for travel care, an area for, say, children's health. So, you know, chicken pox gels, teething, sort of trapped wind, an area where they might sell nappies. All these things will be on self-selection. They don't need to be necessarily behind the counter, you know. You'd expect an area for, say, cough and cold, sort of vapors to inhale, decongestants, or you know, tablets, decongestant sort of medicines, with the really stronger ones behind the counter. Okay, lozenges for a sore throat, that kind of thing. So cough and cold, you'd expect an area for first aid, you know, minor burns, cuts and grazes, plasters, you know, that kind of thing. Again, all of this should be on the shop floor. An area for vitamins and supplements, minerals, you know, iron and calcium supplements. An area which I think we mentioned before, NRT, nicotine replacement therapy, so patches and gums and what have you, to help people give up smoking. You'd expect an area for ladies' health, sanitary pads, feminine washes, that kind of thing, shampoos, soaps and sanitizers. Obviously hand gels do sell quite well these days for some reason, but, you know, you'd expect these kind of things. Now, some pharmacies that have more shop floor space, they'll diversify to have more. They'll sell maybe, you know, walking sticks for the elderly. If that community has a lot of, you know, elderly people, there might be a big area on the shop floor for, say, you know, incontinence pads and walking sticks and what have you, and all sorts of aids for the elderly. Again, community pharmacy, you're going to adjust what you keep on the shop floor. You're going to tweak it for your extras are going to be adjusted according to the community you serve. Okay. And then just another quick shout out for the consultation room. So in the UK, you would expect now pharmacy to have like a private area, ideally like a sort of a separate room. So this is an example of a decent sized room. And once you've got a consultation room, you can do extra services such as blood pressure checks. So that's an Omron, which is quite a nice blood pressure meter. I use that one at home actually. So here's a lady having a blood pressure checked, and usually the staff are trained to do that. And if the blood pressure is too high, I can refer them on to the GP or the nurse at the doctor's surgery. So that's quite a nice aspect. So once you've got a consultation room, you can do consultations for, say, EHC, emergency hormonal contraception, so like the morning after pill, as it's kind of colloquially called. So over the years I've done a lot of those, because obviously there's sort of certain questions you have to ask the ladies to make sure the medicine's right. So you can do what else can you do? You can do seasonal flu jabs, because you've got a private area to do that. And some pharmacies I've noticed, particularly in central London, they tend to do like hair loss clinics. So the mousses you apply and that kind of thing. Travel vaccinations, so not just the standard seasonal flu jab, but extra vaccination jabs for yellow fever and people traveling to more unusual countries. Again, these are all sort of extra things. Diet and nutrition appointments. You can do sort of medicines discussions with the patients if they're not sure about the medicines and they want a private area. But you can use these consultation rooms for anything, like even if someone's having like a mental health crisis and they just need to speak to someone, a dispenser or a pharmacist, they just want to be given a number to phone and just someone to just talk to for a few minutes, just to gather their thoughts and be what we call signposted, or just pointed in the right direction. We can give them like a telephone number for mental health lines where there's properly trained counsellors, or connect them to the right kind of people that are trained for that. But once you've got a consultation room, it opens the door to literally all sorts of services the pharmacy can offer. So community pharmacy is just covers so many aspects. I mean, I've just got a picture here. You've got on the right side, you can probably see a door with looks like a black stripe, but I think that's just the consultation room with the light off, and that's probably a bit of glass. So that's like the unsung hero of pharmacy. It's really easily missed, the consultation room, but you'd be amazed how many services that community pharmacy can offer out of that room. I use the consultation room, I think, a lot more than I thought I would originally when they were put in. So that's quite a nice aspect. But really, when you walk into a pharmacy, that's, at a casual glance, that's the kind of thing you're probably going to see as your communal garden. As Seb would say, salt and vinegar crisps pharmacy, that's the kind of thing you'd expect to see. Now, I know a lot of you are abroad and you're probably flying to usually London. There are other cities in the UK, believe it or not, but I know a lot of you will probably fly into London because everyone wants to see London. So this is a pharmacy that's often pointed to. Most people, when they go to London, will go to Oxford Street or Tottenham Court Road because it's a really famous retail shopping street, and they'll go to like Leicester Square and all these areas that are close together in central London. So this is John Bell and Croydon, and it's actually even bigger than the photo suggests, and it's an example of, shall we say, a traditional pharmacy, but it's a bit like the Selfridges of pharmacy. It's really, really big. It offers lots and lots of services. So you've got the clinical services, which is nice, and you've got all the kind of retail side of it as well, without kind of being like a generic large chain. Not that there isn't a place for large chains, but this is something that I just encourage you to go to, and you can easily find it online, and it's a short walk from Oxford Street. So it's just something a bit different and a bit more fancy. Because I'm sure if you're going to be staying with friends in the suburbs of any town, you're going to see a local community pharmacy anyway. So this is something, if you come to London, that's nice to see. And on Oxford Street itself, yes, there are loads of large flagship, shiny, glitzy retail stores where you can buy lots of makeup if you wish. But I love community pharmacy because I love building those relationships with regular patients and all the regular local GPs and dentists. But yeah, that's something you can look into. So that's it. That was a really quick just run through. I've just done light brush strokes. That, you know, I haven't sort of tried to sort of scare you with lots of detail or the financial side of it. That's just the feel of it. I hope that helps. Okay, shall I hand back to Dan?
Oh, yep, thank you very much. I mean, obviously no one's been able to see a community pharmacy in person this winter, but that's definitely what you provided, the next best thing. So
a taster, yeah.
Yeah, a little taster. So massive thank you for that. It's really, really insightful for everyone. And there'll be a Q&A session at the end. So any questions you've got, either write them down or keep them in your notes. And you can ask all of those once everyone's had their time to speak. So thank you very much.
Okay. Shall I stop sharing my screen? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
There we go.
Great. So now if we move on to our next speaker, which is Regan McCahill, who'll be discussing GP pharmacy. So she's been a very active BPSA member, having gone from being a BPSA national representative to an international representative. She was then the publications officer for the BPSA before becoming the student exchange officer for a short period. After this, Regan was the president of the BPSA and honoured with honorary life membership. This is not only just like a couple of, well, this is only a couple of her accolades, and she's now practicing as a primary care network pharmacist. So over to you, Regan, to explain a little more.
Thank you, Daniel. So hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying this session so far. So like Dan said, my name is Regan. In terms of where I am geographically in the UK, I'm probably the furthest away from Omagh that you can get. So I'm right at the top of England in Newcastle city centre, which is the best city centre if you're ever going to come and visit us. So I'll share my screen now. I've got a little presentation and then kind of a practice patient to show you. There we go. Is that working okay?
Yeah.
Fab. Great. So how do I get rid of all of this at the top? Zoom meetings.
I could just see the slides. I think it would be okay.
Oh, great. Okay, I've got like Zoom notifications popping up. Great. So my job is I'm a primary care network pharmacist. So what does that mean? So I work in a doctor's surgery that is part of a larger network. So in the UK, there's loads and loads of primary care networks that consist of numerous doctor's surgeries and community pharmacies that all work together for patient care, essentially. But I'm based in one doctor's surgery. So just a little bit about my background. So Dan went through some of it, but I started pharmacy late. So I was a mature student, felt like I was at university for ages because I did like a couple of foundation degrees, finally graduated from Durham in 2019 and then did my training in hospital and general practice. So it was a split post. I started my PCN role last August and I'm currently the immediate past president of BPSA. I had the pleasure of being the president during the COVID outbreak, so that was fun. So my roles and responsibilities in my day job. So like I said, I work in a general practice that's part of 9 surgeries, and I work as part of a larger multidisciplinary team. So that's doctors, nurses, district nurses, physios, paramedics, technicians, any kind of healthcare professional you can think of, I work with them. And it is very kind of collaborative working. So I'll ask them for advice, they'll ask me for advice. We're one big happy family, it's great. I have like a prescription team underneath me. So I've got 3 admin type people. One of them is a student tech as well. So they kind of do all the kind of logistical things for me. So they will kind of call community pharmacies and arrange for mediboxes. They will call hospital secretaries and ask for questions for me and things like that. So they're kind of like my secretaries and they are fab, like they're so good. I do a lot of teaching. So I've got a student tech, I've got a pre-reg with me at the minute as well. So I'm not her tutor because I haven't been qualified long enough, but she spends most of her time with me, if I'm completely honest. And I'm also developing a program to have another 2 pre-regs with us this year and 10 pre-regs with us the following year. So that's really, really exciting. And that's kind of where my passion lies, is kind of bringing up the next generation. So as well, I do a lot of kind of medicines information type stuff. So a patient will ring and say, can I take turmeric with everything else that I'm taking? Or a doctor will say, this patient's got liver failure, can I prescribe this antibiotic? Is there a better alternative? Things like that. I think when we're training, we kind of assume that doctors will know these things, but they don't. And one of the best kind of pieces of advice I ever got when I was training was, assume that everybody who's seen the patient before you is stupid and you can't go far wrong. So never assume that somebody's already kind of made the right decision. It's our job to be that safety net. So that brings me on to authorising medication. So whenever somebody's kind of prescribed something, whenever somebody's prescribed something, or they are, we're kind of coming up to their repeat template being ready, a pharmacist will look at it. So I'll look at the prescription and check, is it still indicated? So do they even still need it? Or have they been on lansoprazole forever because at one point they were on ibuprofen and they just never got took off their PPI? Is it still clinically appropriate? So are they kind of past the age now where they shouldn't really be having this anymore? Is there any interactions? Has any new medication been started? And are there any better alternatives? So there's obviously new guidance come out all of the time, and we never kind of go back and update all those patients. So at some point they'll come to me and I'll say, actually, the best guidance is this, so we're going to change that. And this is me in the wild. I spend a lot of my time on the phone now because of COVID, so I do a lot of the things over the phone. So I do kind of lots of reconciling medications, it's called. So if somebody's had an appointment at the hospital, say for arthritis, and they're changing their treatment, we'll get a letter saying, please can you change this treatment, and can you make sure that monitoring's done, so bloods and things like that. People come out of hospital, they get discharged, we get a letter transferred back to our care, and we have to make sure that the medication is safe. So if you think about heart attacks, so somebody in their 50s or 60s will be perfectly healthy on no medication, they'll have a heart attack, they'll go into hospital, they'll come out on 5 meds. That's a complete life changer for them. And quite often, nobody's really taken the time to have that conversation with them, because the hospitals, especially now, just want you kind of in and out as quickly and as safely as possible. So we ring them, we go through each of the medications, we explain why they're taking them, how to take them, make sure the compliance is good. And that has a big, big impact on patients' lives. And that's just one example. So we do that across the board. So I'm going to share my screen now. So this is my kind of work space. And I just kind of show you a little bit about how I kind of work. So this is obviously a test patient, Mr. Mickey Mouse. He's got tons and tons of things wrong with him. So these are all the things that are wrong with him. Can you see it okay, Seb?
I don't think so, Regan. You might have to change the screen that you're sharing.
You see it now?
No.
Now?
If you yeah, we can see it.
Yay! So this is Mr. Mickey Mouse, and these are all the things that are wrong with him. So this is kind of like our quick thing here to see that he's got COPD, he's got diabetes, he's got cancer, he's got hypertension, he's got everything wrong with him, poor mouse. And so what I kind of do is I look at what he's currently on. So these are all his medications, and decide whether he can still have them or not. So once a year, we'll do a review of everybody's medication to decide whether it's still, what I said, have been appropriate and things. So for example, Ramapril, I'll look at that and have a look at his recent blood pressure and decide whether it's still okay. So it's within range, so I'm happy for him to have it. I would also check kind of his blood work. So Mickey Mouse hasn't had any blood work done, but here normally will show you kind of his kidney function, his liver function, his kind of full blood count, anything else that we want to check in, so calcium, anything like that. We can also see his pulse rate, how much he weighs, what his BMI is. So he could do with, you know, losing a few pounds, could Mickey. How much he drinks, how much he smokes. So all of these things are things that we can have interventions with. And then I'll decide whether he can still have it or not. So that's just kind of a little look at my screen. So I do lots of things in here as well. Right, let me get back onto the presentation now. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Did I do it right? Yay. Yay me. So that is how I work. So the other things that I do are patient facing. So I run clinics 2 days a week, and I do a variety of things. So I do contraception reviews and general medication reviews. So people will come in for kind of observations. So if you think about people on antipsychotics, and we've got to make sure that their weight's okay, their blood pressure's okay. So this is me doing somebody's BMI. I also do hypertension clinics and cardiovascular disease prevention. So thinking about, like, do people need statins? Do they need antihypertensive? Things like that. So there's me doing blood pressure. And asthma and COPD is kind of another main area that I do. Asthma not so much, but COPD I'm big on. I'm a big fan of the lungs. And you can have some really good interventions with these patients. And it's all about kind of optimizing their treatment. And we're doing some additional services at the minute. So that's me in our vaccination clinic, having a great time. So obviously right now it's COVID vaccinations, but it could be something else kind of later down the line. And that's the beauty of our profession, really, because we can get involved in so many different things. We've got such a wide skill set that we can get involved with so much. So I really, really love my job. So yeah, that's me. Nice whistle stop tour. I hope that was okay, and I'll be around for questions at the end.
Thank you so much for that. That was really, really insightful, and definitely clear that GP pharmacy is really dynamic and changing, you know, more and more, and it's one of the newer fields in pharmacy as well in the UK. So it's great to see such a good presentation on that. So now if we move on to Matthew Brown, so he'll be discussing hospital pharmacy. And he's been the European officer for BPSA and attended 3 BPSA annual conferences and many EPSA events. So this is his first IPSF event. Over to you, Matt. I think you're on mute at the moment. Oh,
You can mute now. You can unmute now, probably.
There we go. Sorry, thanks, Seb. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Matthew. Thanks for the introduction, Dan. Hi, Omar, Regan, Hera, and Matthew, our other speaker. So I'm just going to share my screen now for this presentation on hospital pharmacy. Let's see if this works. Hopefully you can all see that. Give us a wave if you can. Great stuff. Okie doke. So yeah, I'll be giving you a sort of 10-minute talk or so on hospital pharmacy. I currently am working in care of the elderly, so our older population. And I am based in Leeds, which is one of the northern city in England here, sort of in the middle. And yeah, in between Regan and Omar, really. So apologies for any accent difficulty, and not as well spoken as Omar. Right, let's see if we can move on. Okay, so what we'll be going through, a bit more about me. What is hospital pharmacy exactly? What does a hospital pharmacist do? The references I've used, and I'm sure Dan will make these slides or the resources and references I've used available at the end. And then any questions at the end with all the other speakers, so feel free to jot some notes. I've just popped down the logos of the things that have sort of made me. So at the top there is my my university I went to, so that's Nottingham. In the middle is the RPS, which is our professional body that represents us as pharmacists here in the UK. The BPSA at the bottom, very dear to my heart, obviously, that got me into all of this. And then bottom left is my trust that I work at, which is the Leeds Teaching Hospitals, which I think on paper is one of the largest in Europe. So I work for a really big organisation. Okay, about me. So there's Hera making an appearance there, top right. So that was, I think, at one of our BPSA events leading up to an EPSA event I attended, and we were planning and prepping for that. I think it might have been when we visited the Czech Republic, Hera, I think, if I remember rightly. Okay, so I worked in community pharmacy a bit, like some of the ones Omar showed. Mine was one of the small village pharmacies, and I worked there sort of as a Saturday boy, and that was helping with prescriptions and the dispensing of, and I then knew I wanted to go and study pharmacy at university, so I'd got a bit of experience of the inner workings of a community pharmacy. During my degree, I also worked in the outpatient pharmacy at the hospital in Nottingham. So that was similar to a community pharmacy, but the types of prescriptions that were coming through were from hospital. And through that, my focus sort of turned into wanting to work as a hospital pharmacist. So I carried out my pre-registration year, which is a mandatory requirement for both UK and overseas students to become a registered professional here in the UK. So I carried that out at the hospital of my university in Nottingham, and then I moved to Leeds here, and then for 3 years I did my foundation programme, and then just at the start of 2020 I became a specialist clinical pharmacist specialising in just elderly care, but then COVID kicked off, so I've sort of been here, there and everywhere over the last year or so. It's starting to get back to focusing on the elderly, but yeah, we'll move on now. So what is hospital pharmacy? I've just popped a picture in there of prescription charges just to show that when the NHS first started, so it'll be its 73rd birthday this coming July, but prescriptions were free, and then they've ever so increased sort of every year, bit by bit, and we're now currently at £9.15. So for those of you who have got a currency converter, you can work that out, what it is in your currencies from wherever you are, but £9.15 is the current charge per item on a prescription medication. In 1958, the Atkin report brought into the safe and secure handling medicines as part of our main focus of the role of pharmacy within the NHS. So that is something that is core to our profession and what we carry out day in, day out. In 1963, something called the Yellow Card Scheme was developed. Now that was brought about because in 1961, some of you may know, there was the thalidomide crisis, which showed side effects that led to birth deformities from a medication that was used as an anti-sickness tablet in pregnant women. So the Yellow Card Scheme, which some of you may be aware of, if not, I'd encourage you to go and have a look at it. It's something we've created here in the UK to help notify the drug manufacturers and other healthcare professionals about medicines that may pose a risk to our patients. And subsequently, in 1968, the Medicines Act was formed by UK government, and that is something we still use and employ today to keep the safe and secure handling medicines regimented and allows us to follow things by law. In 1986, for hospital pharmacy, were implemented an on-call system, and that was from another report that puts clinical pharmacy or pharmacy as a core clinical service that was needed in the NHS. So really, the hospital pharmacy job I carry out today looked very different from the start and was more about the safe, secure of handling and supply of medications. But in terms of the clinical role that I carry out today, it was really only sort of coming into part of the job description from the 80s. In 1997, the Yellow Card Scheme was then handed out to hospital pharmacists and community pharmacists as well. And this actually changed the degree requirements. So pharmacy used to just be a 3-year bachelor degree. And then in the late 90s there, it changed into a 4-year degree. And there was the introduction of the pre-registration year. And then I've just popped this one in as it actually is quite relevant to myself now. So in 2006, independent prescribing was made available to pharmacists. So that is a qualification that you can carry out and then become an independent prescriber. So like Omar said earlier, you you will be receiving prescriptions from all different types of professionals, and one of those can now be pharmacists. And I have just started my prescribing qualification 2 weeks ago now. So very early stages, but I'll be learning to become a prescriber, so I'll be able to independently write prescriptions. Okay, next slide. So what's hospital pharmacy? So apologies, this is quite a text heavy slide. I'll leave it up there for you all for a minute or so for you to just have a read through, but this is actually copy and pasted direct from the GPHC, which is the General Pharmaceutical Council, and that's our regulatory body in the UK. And this actually stipulates what a pharmacist is and does. So pretty much every pharmacist in the UK will be carrying out some activities which will meet these descriptions to some degree. So as you can see, the third one up from the bottom, respond to patient symptoms and advise on medicines for sale in pharmacies. That's something that Omar and the community sector will be carrying out on a day-to-day basis. I don't sell medications to anybody on the ward. That would probably break some code of ethics, I'm sure. But I'll just have a run through through most of these and explain how I meet this in my day-to-day job as a hospital pharmacist. So meds management is a term that's bounded about quite often, and that is, well, the management of the medicines that we use day to day as hospital pharmacists. Now that can be right down to each individual patient and managing their medication regime that they have come in with, or that we've newly been starting them on, depending on what they've presented to hospital with. It can be upscaled to the ward. So I sort of become a ward pharmacist and have some consistency with the ward that I look after. So that's the elderly patients. So I'll be managing the medicine stock list for that ward. So that will be deciding on what medications are kept as stock on site on that ward versus what we need to supply on a patient request basis. And then for those above me in the food chain working for the hospital, that can be looking at the whole hospital and what medications are required for the hospital itself. And that's something called a formulary. So that's a bit like a shopping catalogue for that hospital, but it is unique to each hospital around the country. And that touches again a bit like what Omar was saying, your patient population can influence what you supply and look after. So here in the north, there's sometimes is more of a focus on conditions such as obesity, whereas out in the southwest, say in Cornwall and Devon, where the air is a bit cleaner, there's a bit more countryside, people probably have a bit better health education themselves. They might have more things to do with blood pressure or diabetes, let's say, so their medications at their local hospitals will reflect that picture. Looking at the fourth one up from the bottom, advise other healthcare professionals. That is something that I am a bit like Regan alluded to as part of a multidisciplinary team, or the MDT. That's something I'm part of day in, day out. So I don't just work on my own like Omar would be the only healthcare professional in his community pharmacy. He does liaise with the MDT, but they're not physically there as part of the team. Whereas working in a hospital here in the UK, you are in and amongst it with the nurses, the doctors, the physiotherapists, the speech and language therapists, which is quite an interesting one, which I might allude to a little later. The occupational therapists and many other different types of professionals, but in a big, large teaching hospitals like Leeds, where I work, that's all too commonplace. Speaking of Leeds, I think I've just got a few nice pictures of what my hospitals that I work in look like. So this first one is Gledhow Wing, so it's quite an older part of Leeds teaching hospitals. I think it's 50s or 60s it was built. So not particularly pretty, but there's a nice garden out the front there. So I work on sort of the top two floors where the elderly patients are kept. That sounds awful. Where they stay whilst they're needed looking after. The next one here is a bit more modern. So this is Bexley Wing, and this is where our leading cancer centre is kept. So this is quite a common feature of most modern hospitals in the UK. Very sleek, lots of curved edges, whereas the previous one you can see is blocks and squares. So that's Bexley Wing. And then finally, I actually live across from this hospital. So this is the LGI, which is from the Victorian era, so 1800s. And you can see that there from the architecture. So that's the Leeds General Infirmary. And all of those sites were working independently as hospitals themselves. And then in 2005, they all merged together, which is quite common for the large hospitals in the UK, to form a trust. And so this is the Leeds Teaching Hospitals Trust. Okay, so what do I actually do? So see if you can spot me there. That was on my first day of work here in Leeds. And that was the cohort that I started with. So as a junior hospital pharmacist, you will rotate through many different areas and will be taught about all those previous points and how they can be best sort of carried out in your day-to-day work. Obviously, the patient is at the center of everything we do. So we do follow quite closely the 7 principles of medicines optimization that we have in the UK, which can be found on the RPS website. And some of these resources I talk about, I'll make sure that the guys, Seb and Dan, will make available for you to access in your own time. But patients are always at the focus of what we do, and carrying out your day-to-day tasks, you must always try and keep that in mind. So when a patient first enters the hospital, we would perform a medication history check and work out what it was they were taking before they came in. Ideally, you would do that with the patient, but where I work in elderly at the minute, sometimes they can be quite infirm and have cognitive and memory issues. So you will sort of become a bit of a detective and look for other sources to use. So that could be their GP records, that can be the care home they've come from, a family member, or liaise with people like Omar and speak to their regular community pharmacist, and they can offer a nice insight into that patient's life and how they use their medicines at home. You'll then obviously do the basic things of allergy checks, whether they've brought their meds in, which will obviously help, and what that patient, kind of what they want from their medications. So it's a good, really. Then depending on what they've come in with, you will address each of those medications in turn and check for liver function or renal function issues. Whether they've got a new diagnosis of, say, a cardiac condition or a neurological condition. And then throughout that patient stay, you will work with the doctors and see if any medication changes are needed, whether any tools are needed to be implemented to help with their adherence. So whether they've come in because they forgot to take in their medications, or it might be that they've taken too much. And putting all of that together, you will obviously come up with a plan in liaison with the doctors, the nurses, the physios, and all the other people that you work with in hospital. Some of the other aspects of work aren't just about the patients directly, they're about working in line with national incentives, so antibiotic and AMR resistance, which you guys with the IPSF do a lot. The UK government pushes it as well, and we have antibiotic guardians. So that was me there a couple of years back, and that was me working there. So a little similar to Regan's setup as well, sitting at a desk with a phone, a PC in front of you, and working away, looking at all your resources that you need to make sure you're carrying out safe and secure patients' safety. That was me this year, just gone with the antibiotic. A little different to last time there with a mask, goggles and scrubs. That's a new addition. And then on the right was during my pre-registration year at Nottingham. So that was a vaccination campaign that we were carrying out. There are other functions of a hospital pharmacist as well, such as auditing. And that's to make sure that the work we do is effective and cost effective as well. So you can look at auditing around antibiotics. So that can be whether IV antibiotics were switched after day 3, whether they had a day 3 review. Controlled drugs are also a section of medications that we look at closely to make sure that no diversion is taking place and that the teams that are using these medicines are using them safely. Counselling patients is also a big thing that community pharmacists do day in, day out. But if a patient was to be newly started on a medication, or if they were to receive a vaccine, we would need to obviously counsel them and go through that. So a lot of work I do is speaking directly to the patient. And then something I don't do much of anymore, but during my pre-registration year was the manufacturing of medicine. So in a hospital, we have aseptic units. So certain medications that can be found in there are chemotherapy. There's also non-sterile manufacturing. So when we manipulate medications such as omeprazole capsules, we would disperse that and make an omeprazole suspension for the pediatrics patients. So there's a lot of that aspect to hospital pharmacy as well does happen. And throughout a rotational program, if you were to work in the UK, you would go through all these steps. So that's something I have touched on in my past. And then a couple of other areas that pharmacists can work in is the A&E department, quality assessment and quality control. So that's looking at import and export of medications. So with regards to licensing, some medicines we use in the UK, let's say, are different to say the US, so we would potentially import that medication, but then the pharmacy department here in the hospital would make sure that that is safe and effective for patients here in the UK. There's also clinical trials, so that was a big focus on with the likes of medications such as remdesivir and tocilizumab. So a lot of clinical trials have been going on in the hospitals, and pharmacists have been key at the centre of that. And finally, the last one I've written down is medicines information. So most large teaching hospitals have a medicines information department, and that's sort of the geek hub where the true nerdy pharmacists live to wheedle out and get the answers to all the hard sought after questions that other clinicians may pose us. So a bit like Regan's example earlier, whether a patient might be taking turmeric or any other herbal medications, will that interact with their regular tablets? That is something that potentially the medications information department will look into for us. Another example, that was me in work when we just started wearing scrubs. So on the left is one of our more senior pharmacists. On the right, the lady in white is a pharmacy technician. So we work closely with them. They help us carry out our day-to-day. And the lady in green there, she's one of our specialist pharmacists in antimicrobials. So she's been really key this year in helping out with the blue tech forms that we require for remdesivir. This is me a couple of years ago working on the elderly admissions wards. So this is just a wide variety of the MDT of who we work with. So you can see me there in the middle. In the middle, the lady in blue is the sister nurse in charge. On the left is a doctor with a stethoscope. She is one of the consultants in elderly who I'm actually working with now for my prescribing course. The lady in purple is a discharge coordinator. So they're really important about one of the core aspects we do as hospital pharmacists, which is discharging our patients. Obviously, that's what we want to do. As soon as they come in, the first thing we want to do is try and get them home and better. So they're a real key part of the team, and we liaise closely with them around getting our patients home. Back across, the lady to the right in the checkered shirt, she's a ward clerk. So that's part of the administrative team that work on wards. And then there's a couple of doctors and housekeepers thrown in there who make up part of our MDT that we work with. So there are a couple of the references that I've used. There's a couple of YouTube videos in there. So I will make sure that's all available at the end. And then I thought it feels a long time ago since I was a student. And Hera alluded to it earlier. So there's a TikTok up next that will show what a hospital pharmacist is like to the doctors. It is comedic. It's not exactly like real life, but it is a little. Right, here we go.
Hello? Hey, this is Dan with Pharmacy. You ordered vancomycin for Jones in 2319? Yeah. What's the indication? Possible hospital-acquired pneumonia. Are you okay with me adjusting the dose for his kidney function? Yeah, please do. Thanks for checking in. Oh, I'm not done. What? I'm not nearly finished with you. Excuse me? You reordered Jones's home statin, but he has LFT elevations. It should be helped. Actually, I've read a few different things about that. Let me hold it. Okay. And you reordered his home eye drops, but I called his outpatient pharmacy and he hasn't refilled that prescription in months. Did you ask him whether he's still using them? Or I could just discontinue them. Let's just do that. And you ordered IV flagyl. I assume you know it has equivalent oral bioavailability. Yeah, I've switched it to PO. Okay, thanks. Now I really have to go. You're not getting off that easy. You reordered a blood thinner without giving any indication as to when his last dose was. I know. Don't you dare roll your eyes at me. What is happening? You should bow before me. Where are you? And you dare to order him melatonin, the most controversial and expensive medication known to mankind? You can discontinue it. I'm sorry. Please just let me be. You can adjust any meds you want. Okay, great. Thanks. Have a good one.
So that's just a little reflection on how we work with our doctors team.
Hey,
so,
this is Dan with Pharmacy.
How we work with our doctors, obviously a little tongue-in-cheek, but there you go. And that's me on a little bit of self-promotion. That's me on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you do have any further questions after this session, but I'm sure we'll go through all of that with the other guys. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So that was really, really good. And I'm sure everyone's got a much better insight into what hospital pharmacy in the UK is like now. So thank you very much for that. And at the end, there'll be lots and lots of questions, I'm sure, coming through. So I'm sure you'll stick around to answer some of those. So we'll now move on to our final speaker, which is Matthew Michael. So he'll be talking about industry pharmacy. So Matthew is the IT officer for BPSA, before then becoming the vice president alongside Regan during the COVID period. And he was also honoured with honorary life membership for the BPSA. He's got experience in community and hospital pharmacy, but today I'll be talking to you about his current job role in industry. So whenever you're ready, over to you, Matt.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I'll just share my screen. Brilliant. Are you able to see that? I can't see anybody, so if Daniel will. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to see people from so many different countries here. I've took down some of the country names. There's so many people from Egypt here, Palestine, Algeria, Indonesia, Canada. So it's great to see how interested people are in pharmacy in the UK and want to find out more about pharmacy in the UK. Yeah, so thank you very much. And thank you, Seb and Daniel, for putting this together. It's brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the UK pharmaceutical industry. I'm a pharmacovigilance and regulatory affairs officer. That's my job title, but I do tend to do more things. I work in a small company. I've worked in quality, medicines information, medical writing, tons of different things. So yeah, I'm just going to give an overview. So about myself, I started my journey in pharmacy working in a community pharmacy when I was 14 years old. For me, that was really character building. I was quite nervous at that age. I was quite timid, and it really helped me to build my confidence and develop to where I am now. I definitely wouldn't have got involved in pharmacy if it wasn't for that job. So for me, that was my starting point, and that was a really, really important step for me. So, you know, if anybody's thinking, oh, should I be working well at university? For me, I loved it, and it helped me out so much. So that was 9 years ago. That's what I looked like. I thought I looked cool, but maybe not. I completed my studies at school while working the weekends and during summer holidays as well. And I went to the University of Nottingham after I finished. So I'm from London originally, and then I went to Nottingham when I turned 18 and studied there. And that's the library that I used to go study in at night. So if you want to know what a UK university is like, this is one of the campuses, and that was the library I used to go to. It was open 24 hours at night, so I'm sure Matthew Brown might know about it as well. And then whilst at University of Nottingham, I worked in a big community pharmacy chain as well. There's a very big chain in Nottingham whose base is there. So that was a good experience for me. It was good I'd originally worked in an independent pharmacy, so there wasn't a big chain, the boss was there. Everybody was there that I needed to speak to, whereas working for a big chain is quite different. But yeah, it was a good experience. And I wasn't really involved in the BPSA, not until my 4th year. I went into a competition, and then the BPSA's 77th annual conference was held in Nottingham that year. And yeah, it was a great week. I got really involved in the BPSA from that point on. And that's how I'm here today. I wouldn't even know Sebastian if it wasn't for the BPSA. So definitely get involved in your national associations. It's one of my regrets not getting involved earlier. So I was IT officer and then vice president in my final year of my pre-registration year. So in the UK, you do a 4-year master's degree, and then you do a pre-registration year, which is changing name soon. And that's sort of your year of practice where you're meant to develop your skill set further, add on to what you've learned and show that you can actually do those things. And then you get signed off by a tutor to say that, yeah, you're ready to do those things. And then you have to do an exam after to register as a pharmacist. So I did mine in a joint community pharmacy and industrial pharmacy placement, which is, I'm extremely fortunate to have got. It's very rare in the UK to have those placements. So yeah, I was really, really lucky to get that. And, you know, I failed the first time in getting a place. I went to a big pharmaceutical company and I failed the interview. And I also failed to get a job, my first job when I was at the University of Nottingham. So I applied for the same job that Matthew Brown had. So he probably left the year that I joined. So I applied for that job. I didn't get that job, but yeah, if you stick with it, you'll get to wherever you're aiming to get eventually. So I'm now working in the same company for the industry half of my pre-registration year as the Regulatory Affairs and Pharmacovigilance Officer. So Omar showed what community pharmacies are like. I moved to a very rural area, so countryside in a very small village. This is the community pharmacy I worked in. It was very old-fashioned, very picturesque, you know, and it's really probably the only pharmacy for 5 miles or something like that. So it was really at the heart of the community. And this is the pharmacy that was connected to that one. So when people talk about the pharmaceutical industry, you probably picture massive manufacturing facilities, these huge, beautiful glass buildings, these nice modern buildings and labs and that sort of thing, maybe some testing laboratories. The pharmaceutical company that I work for is the top floor of that pharmacy. So it used to be a flat and it got converted into an office space. And so I work in an office space, small office for 7 people, and we are a multinational pharmaceutical company. So what is working in the pharmaceutical industry in the UK like? The pharmaceutical industry is extremely diverse, and I'm sure you've learned from the other speakers how diverse pharmacy in itself is within the UK. The pharmaceutical industry, there's so many different roles that you can get involved in. And the reason why I really like pharmaceutical industry is that wide skill set that Regan was talking about earlier. You can really touch base and apply in so many different places, especially working for a small company. You know, one day you can be medical writing, going really in depth into some clinical information to try to get a medicine approved. And then another day you could be looking at drug safety. So there's tons of different roles in the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry naturally is an international business. So across many different countries that some of the people here are from, there will be plenty of similarities, but also plenty of differences. So across the world, there's these ISO standards. So that's the International Organization for Standardization. And these ISO standards are sort of set to try to harmonize the way things operate across the world and make it easier. For example, in the case of the pharmaceutical industry, to get medicines implemented and regulated and approved across different parts of the globe in a more easily streamlined way. So there's an ISO standard, ISO 9001 for GMP. I've never actually read it, to be honest. But that's sort of the top foundation. And then below that, every region will have its own requirements. So for example, the European Union publishes its own directives and its own guidance. And then under that, you'll have national guidance. So in the UK, that would be the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Agency. In Ireland, it would be the Health Products Regulations Agency, you know, UAE, Ministry of Health. So every country has its own sort of governing body that takes care of medicines licensing. And there'll always be differences in every country, in every region, but there's a set level of standardization across most countries in the world. And most countries have their own set of requirements that you need to, as somebody trying to put a drug on the market, that you need to meet. So an example of that, you can have a drug, you know, there's a standard in vitro test that you have to do for this drug. And in one region, they can say, okay, you need to do this test in 900 milliliters, like a dissolution test, dropping a tablet in water and seeing how long it takes for it to dissolve. In one market, they can say you need to put it in 900 milliliters of liquid and you need to move a paddle at 30 rotations per minute. And in another market, they can say 1,000 milliliters, 35 rotations. So you have to do both of those tests to get it put into both of those markets. So yeah, that sort of gives an idea of there's lots of similarities, but also subtle differences between different regions. I work with plenty of colleagues from across the globe as well, who were for duties that I used to perform in the UK. So, you know, whatever country you're in, you'll be sure to get involved in, if you get into the pharmaceutical industry, you'll be sure to get involved in medicines across the world, not just the country that you're in. So I've worked on medicines outside of the EU, inside of the EU, and in the UK. The UK itself has a very big sort of foot in the pharmaceutical industry. So before Brexit, before the UK was going to leave the European Union, the European Medicines Agency used to be based in the UK. And even now that we've left the EU, there's still plenty of integration with the European market. And after Brexit, there's also new partnerships coming into place. So the UK has now built a partnership with, I think it's Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland. So probably there'll be more integration with the UK and these other countries. So the point I'm trying to get across is, wherever you are in the world, you're probably going to be involved with different countries, pharmaceutical regulatory authorities, agencies, rules, guidance, if you're working in the pharmaceutical industry. It's a global job role. And the environment that you work in, it could be an office job. You could, like myself, you could be working in a testing laboratory. So for example, in the UK or in the EU, each batch of medicine that goes out, you need to test that batch and you need to make sure that it fits within its set parameters. So perhaps at university, some of you might have seen like hardness testing, where they put the tablet in a machine and it clumps it and it sees what pressure is required to break that tablet. And when you put that medicine on the market, you'll say this is the set parameters for that medicine. And that's showing that your manufacturing process is consistent over and over again. Yeah, I'll move on to the next slide. So, like I said, I work in regulatory and pharmacovigilance, but I do other things. I'll just cover briefly what regulatory is. So regulatory affairs, in a nutshell, is managing the product life cycle and liaising with the regulatory healthcare authority. So in the UK, like I said, that's the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Authority. The Regulatory Affairs Department will prepare documents for submission to the regulatory authorities. So an example of that, let's say you've got a new medicine that you want to put on the market, or even a generic medicine that you want to put on the market. It's already been approved, the patent has ended, and now you want to put your version of that on the market. You'll have to declare a shelf life when you make an application to put that on the market. So you need to show how you got to that shelf life. And there's this standard test that you need to do. You need to put your product at a certain temperature, at a certain humidity, in a chamber for 6 months or 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, in order to declare that shelf life for your product. And that will go into your dossier. So a dossier is like a big, it's essentially folders and files and documents that you give to the healthcare authority to say, this is the medicine that we're applying for. This is all of the information that will be published with it. This is the specifications for the product. This is how it's manufactured. These are the excipients. This is how much of each excipient is in there. This is where we get the excipients from. This is where we get the active pharmaceutical ingredient from. This is how it's manufactured. So it's really an A to Z of that product itself. And so the Regulatory Affairs Department are responsible for collating that at the very least, if not being part of generating the documents and all of the things prior to the documents being generated. So that's where it comes in, and it says here, they manage projects from development potentially to post-approval. So before you even give that to the regulatory authorities, you can be looking at what the requirements are to get that product approved and looking at what needs to be done in order to get there. liaising with the commercial teams, etc., to say this is what we need to do, this is how much it's going to cost. And whenever you make a submission to the regulatory authority, they can come back and say, we want some more information. So they call that a request for information. So they can say, you know, you've done this experiment at this with these parameters. We want you to do it with these parameters because X, Y, Z. This is what it says in this guideline. This is how you should do it. And then they can either agree or disagree and come up with a justification for not doing it. So yeah, that's just an example. And once a product is approved, those registered documents, you might want to change them. So for example, if you're continuously producing a batch of products and you know, you keep getting your hardness testing parameter to show that the product is consistently being manufactured in the same way, you know, you keep getting borderline results, you can make an application to widen the specifications of that product as long as you can justify that it's not going to have an effect on the quality of the product and it's not going to have an impact to the safety or to the patient when they take that product. So that would be what we call a variation. You're more likely to do variations on things like the patient information leaflet that goes inside the box, maybe the packaging design or the information on the packaging as well. So that's regulatory affairs in a nutshell. Sorry if that's too descriptive. So what's pharmacovigilance? Pharmacovigilance is a lot more sciencey. It's a lot more, it's like the medical information of the hospital pharmacy. You know, Matthew Brown was describing it like it's sort of for the, you know, the people that are really interested in the detail. That's sort of what pharmacovigilance is. So the European Medicines Agency definition is it's the science and activities relating to the detection, assessment, understanding and prevention of adverse effects or any other medicine related problem. As a pharmacist, pharmacovigilance comes into every single sector. So Matthew showed a slide about with information about the yellow card scheme. So a patient can report an adverse reaction through a yellow card scheme across Europe. So I saw there some people from Poland and France, etc. So across Europe, all of those countries have got their own reporting system, their own national reporting system. And in other countries as well, they have their own reporting systems to get that adverse reaction reported to healthcare authority or to the manufacturer of that drug for them to then process it and look at what's happened. And pharmacovigilance really came into play after the thalidomide crisis. So it's split into those four areas. So I'll just cover what they are briefly. Detection. So in Europe, for every single one of your products, from the day that you submit your application for that product, you need to every week do a literature search. Let's say, for example, you did an application for paracetamol 500 milligram tablets. You'd have to look up paracetamol as a substance, paracetamol 500 milligram tablets as a pharmaceutical form. You might even look up paracetamol intravenous just to see what comes up. And you'll basically assess all of the reactions, all of the information that comes up. So you'll do that in PubMed or PubChem, something like that. You'll take all of that information down and you'll document it to say this is what your findings were. And it's a requirement to do that every single week. You can also get spontaneous reporting from patients. So an example of that was the yellow card scheme. Inside a patient information leaflet, it's got the details of the manufacturer at the bottom. So people can call you up, they can send a letter, they can send an email saying, I've had a reaction to your medicine. And so you need a method of processing that. And there's also something which is a higher level called signal detection. So that's really looking at all the information you have in front of you and saying, okay, potentially there's a change in the characterization of the risk-benefit profile. Some companies, the easiest way for me to explain it would be statistically. So some companies, they have like statistical programs to say this reaction has been reported 10 times and there's only 100,000 patients. So potentially that's a reaction with a 1 in 1,000 frequency. We need to look into it. So that's where detection stops and then assessment starts. So an adverse effect, an example of an adverse effect is I took some paracetamol, I got in my car and I had a car accident. There's nothing to say that the paracetamol caused the car accident, but you also can't rule it out just because you know that paracetamol doesn't do that. So you need to do a causality assessment. You need to identify what the cause was And once you link the causality to the thing that happened, then you have an adverse drug reaction, which is related to the substance that they took. So that's a really critical part of pharmacovigilance. Then the case needs to be processed, and there's set reporting timelines in every country. So you have to report serious reactions in a certain time frame and non-serious reactions in a certain time frame. And you also assess signals. So where you've got, you know, all of your data together and saying, okay, we've had 10 reactions of this, and looking into that a bit further. Then you do the understanding stage. So this is really getting into the nitty-gritty of defining, yes, this is a problem. You know, something's changed in the risk-benefit characterization. We've got all of this information, so we need to do something different. Maybe this drug isn't safe in certain patients. And then once you have all of that information, you get to the prevention stage. This is more of what I do on the day-to-day. So a really important aspect is safety communication. So you have patient information leaflets which go in with every pack of medicine, and then there's the list of side effects, how to take the medicine safely, etc. So if somebody keeps taking, for example, a modified release medicine, and you've had several reports of people chewing that medicine, then there's a problem with the way that you're communicating that information. It might be time to update your leaflet, make it more clear, maybe even on the outer packaging on the carton writing, do not chew, do not crush, which generally is done now for modified release medicines. There's the summary of product characteristics. So that's for healthcare professionals, and that's like basically the patient information leaflet for healthcare professionals. It's a lot more detailed, a lot more scientific and clinical. And then you've got the risk management plan, which is like the way that the manufacturer of the medicine or the marketing authorization holder communicates how they plan to prevent all of the adverse reactions or the effects or the safety issues for that medicine. So you have a list of identified safety issues, potential safety issues, and things that you don't have information for. Something that will link in more to what Regan does, so pregnancy prevention programs. For certain medicines, for example, you need to make sure that the patient isn't pregnant before you prescribe that medicine, and maybe they can only, you know, they have 7 days to get that medicine on a prescription. You can only prescribe a certain amount, and that's because of how dangerous that medicine can be in pregnancy. And yeah, you can also do things like change the legal category of your medicine. So in the UK, recently they changed the legal category of some laxatives. So what this means is, in Omar's presentation, he showed, you know, you've got the pharmacy shop floor, then you've got the counter, you've got medicines behind the counter, and then you've got the dispensary. So on the shop floor, the patient can come along and they can pick up that medicine, they can scan it. And in some pharmacies, they don't even need to, you know, some supermarkets, for example, they don't need to go to the pharmacy to buy that. Then you've got the counter, and then that's when they have to interact with a healthcare professional, somebody that's trained. And then obviously you've got medicines that are on prescription only. So if the safety or the risk-benefit profile changes, then it might be wise to change that as well. And then obviously in a worst case scenario, you can recall a medicine as well. So hopefully that gives an overview of what the pharmaceutical industry in the UK is like. It's very much a global enterprise, and hopefully that covers a bit in a nutshell about what regulatory and pharmacovigilance are. So I'll pass back to Daniel.
Yep, thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for that. So we've covered all of our different pharmacy sectors now, and we'll now move on to a Q&A panel discussion. So if anyone's got any questions for any of the speakers, then just drop them in the chat or raise your hand and I'll come to you in turn. So if anyone's got any questions for, you know, community pharmacy, GP, hospital or industry, just pop it in the chat and you can ask it as they come in. I'll give you a few moments just to write those down. And yeah, we'll start with one that we had earlier on from Nada. So does a patient go to a supermarket pharmacy if there's a pharmacy nearby? So I think that one was for Omar.
Okay. Yeah, so go anywhere you... Sorry, I've got an echo. Can you hear an echo? No? Oh. Thank you. Yeah, you can go wherever you want. Once you know, in the historical sense, you're given a conventional paper prescription, it's valid at any pharmacy that has a dispensing license, which is most of them, let's be honest. So we have a state healthcare system. So just for the purposes of being straightforward, most prescriptions are state healthcare documents. So you can take them to any pharmacy that has a license to dispense. So even if you don't live near a supermarket pharmacy, if it's convenient for your lifestyle, the doctor could have been in London, and then you could have gone to visit your auntie in Bristol, like a completely different city, and you can still use and say you're going to Bristol and there's an out of town supermarket you drive into, you can pop that prescription in there to be dispensed and to collect the medicine. So yeah, there's no, that's a good question actually. There's no, usually, just talking generally, usually there's no restriction. I mean, things are obviously moving on. Just for the sake of simplicity, I don't want to complicate things, but we are moving to an electronic world, as with everything else. So the doctor can buzz prescriptions over to a designated pharmacy, but I didn't want to sort of muddy the waters, like just to keep it in terms of how it's normally been done for decades and decades and decades. You've got the document and you can take it anywhere that you want to. As long as they've got the medicine in stock and there's a pharmacist on duty, then yeah, it's fine. It's just because of how people's lifestyles are, they tend to just use the pharmacy near where they are because that's where they live, Hope that helps.
Yeah, fantastic. If we move on to next, and maybe this one's for Regan. So if you'd be able to speak a little bit more about independent prescriptions and maybe independent prescriber, the sort of like
yeah, so the independent prescribing's changing, in the process of changing, but I'll explain what it is like at the moment. So you do your MPharm degree and then you do your pre-registration training, and then you've got to be in practice for 2 years, and then you do like an external module. Matt could probably talk about it a bit more because he's actually doing it right now. But for me, like, I'm doing a postgraduate qualification, and once that's finished, then I'll do my prescribing, which I think is 10 weeks, is it, Matt?
I think it's over the course of 8 months, and there's about 8 sessions, weekly sessions of actual contact time. But that's sort of, amidst Corona. So it's probably was a little different pre-COVID.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that. I've got a question about pharmacist salary. This is like an open question for anyone, if anyone wants to take this one out in the UK.
It really depends what sector you're in. So in community, you'll get paid a lot more than you get paid in any other sector, but you work like faster. So it depends what sector you're in. So in primary care, so where I work, so you'll start on like a basic salary of like £30,000, £35,000, and you work up to like £45,000, maybe £50,000, depending on kind of what qualifications you have and what responsibilities you have, but it's different in the different areas.
Great. Then we've got in the UK.
Sorry, I think Matt wanted to jump in on that one.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, like Regan said, it really depends on your sector. If you go into community pharmacy, generally your salary is not going to change an awful lot from start to finish, maybe 10, 15, 20% overall. I know people that qualified and straight away they were put on a salary of £45,000 a year, but that's not going to go up. That's going to go up to maybe 50, 55, and it's not going to get much higher after that. Industry will start at about 20, and for some people, depending on the type of job role that they go for, and then it can go up to the hundreds of thousands. And that really goes up exponentially with your experience. So the more years you have in you, the more, the faster that salary is going to go up as well. It's a very competitive market. Independent prescribing wise, I think they tend to get paid more close to the 50, 60 range. I'm not too sure, or maybe Regan's more. Yeah.
Right, thank you. So another question for Omar. How many hours does a community pharmacist work in one day? And are there terms and conditions in regards to work hours?
Okay. This is an interesting question. Being a locum, I've obviously covered all sorts of lengths of shifts. I mean, normally you should be looking at hours like, 7, 8, 9 hours a day. You should have a lunch break, and it should be a case of, working safely as much as you can. But there have been odd times where, yeah, I've been at a pharmacy that was open, well, God, I think from dead early in the morning till gone midnight or something, and there was meant to be 3 pharmacists, and I think it was in Peterborough, and the other ones just didn't turn up, so I ended up doing like 14 hours or something ridiculous. Had like a little break here and there, but that was exceptional. That was because like we were just desperate. Like that was providing care for a big population. It was a hub and spoke, which just basically means it's massive. And I had like 10 dispensers, and there should have been 3 pharmacists, and it was just me. So, I stayed on because they literally, it was just pure desperation. So it was a case of, well, I'll work as long as I can physically work safely. But then I took two days off because like after doing 14 hours, and it was a 2-hour drive there, 2-hour drive back, I was wrecked. But no, normally, it's you work normal safe hours. You might have an early start, but then you finish earlier. So like 6:30 start, finish at 4:30, or start at midday, finish at 11. There's the overlap there. So you've got to be sensible. You need to have breaks, and you've got to work safely. That's the main thing.
Thank you. I don't know if either Seb or Hera will be able to take this one up, but it's just about how can people get involved with either doing master's degrees in the UK or working in the UK? What sort of steps need to be taken to work in the UK in a pharmacy setting in the UK, or working in the UK to work in the UK? No.
So if you're outside of the European Union and you're a qualified pharmacist, you can do an OSPAP, and there's about 4 universities in the UK. There used to be 5, and now there's 4 that offer an OSPAP. And you do that for a year, and then you do a pre-reg, and then you can qualify to be a pharmacist in the UK. It used to be that if you're in Europe, you can just come over and work after doing some paperwork. And as far as that question goes, I think that's what they were getting at. Yeah, okay. So I hope that helps. I've made a little guide about doing that. So if you want that, I can send that out to everyone at the end too.
There we go, thank you. Got a question for Regan, which is about the telephone consultations. So when you're doing like reconciliation of medications, they're just interested about the adherence of the patient. So how often do you call them? Do you run checks? How do you make sure that patients are sticking to their medication regime? Regan?
Yeah, so we can't, I can't sit in the house with them and make sure that they are taking every single tablet that I want them to take. But there are things we can look at. So we can look at how often they are ordering their prescriptions. So if a prescription is supposed to last 28 days and they're ordering it every 46 days, there's a possibility they're not taking their medication properly. It's about having those conversations and checking, understanding, and you get used to it. You kind of can get a feel for when patients are not really doing what you've asked them to. So no, there's no fail-safe way to check that they are taking everything the way I want them to, but there are kind of bits and bobs that we can look at.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for Matt B. Probably just talking about what the difference between clinical pharmacy and hospital pharmacy is.
Yeah, I was just about to start. Oh, an echo is someone else unmuted. No, okay. I'll just live with the echo, right? So there isn't really too much of a difference. Basically, clinical pharmacist that carries out a clinical role, basically, which is patient facing, and so the definition of clinical pharmacist can be applied to the work that Omar does, even what Matthew does in industry, and definitely what myself and Regan do in terms of seeing our patients in their acute unwell phase. But yeah, so a clinical pharmacist, I think, is a bit of a flashy term that people like to use to improve and explain a little better what it is they do, whereas really saying what a hospital pharmacist is more just the adjective to describe the sector that I work in. So I would class myself as a clinical pharmacist, but I would have no problem of any of the other speakers here today classing themselves as clinical pharmacists as well, as long as I feel that the role you carry out is affecting your patient for the better, and that they are at the core of what you're trying to do, then I'd say what you're carrying out is a clinical pharmacist role. I don't know if anyone wants to come in and challenge me and say, no, it should only be applied to certain people, but that's
Okay, if I jump in.
And oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is a good question. Like, you know, how much is clinical and how much is you know, more retail and sales? And basically, you know, you should be applying your clinical knowledge to everything you're doing, from, you know, someone coming in saying, can I open this capsule up because I can't swallow capsules, and it's something that the patient or customer self-selects off the shop floor, all the way through to the GP phone you saying, oh, you know, is that tablet crushable, or that pain relief patch, can you chop it in half to, you know, will the other half be usable? Is that allowed? Is that licensed? Is it? I mean, in community pharmacy, you should be using really your clinical knowledge like every day. I mean, it really is something that, you know, if you probably do it without realizing. I think a lot of community pharmacists use their clinical knowledge all the time and don't realize they are. But yeah, using your clinical knowledge, you know, in theory, we all do it, I think. So that's it. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, no, definitely, like, really good point. And then this is one for Regan, if you'd be able to talk more about pharmacies offering the COVID vaccine at the moment and the tests. So sort of how's it going, I think, in general?
How's it going? No, it's going okay. So we're not doing it kind of in the practices. We've got hubs. So loads of doctor surgeries have gotten together and created like vaccine hubs. So that's how we're giving the vaccines at the minute. We're not doing the testing. So in the UK, you kind of, it's government led and you go to testing sites to get it done rather than kind of doctor's surgeries. But yeah, it's going kind of as well as can be expected, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like a challenging time, but I know the UK is one of the fastest, you know, paced countries in terms of the vaccines. So there's a lot of good happening at the moment. Someone's asking whether the UK is participating in summer SEP, so that's still to be decided at the moment, but I'll release a statement on that in due course, just see how the situation goes. And then I've got a question about why don't pharmacists wear white coats in pharmacies? And also, like, follow-up question, do you think pharmacy as a career is becoming saturated, and then can independent prescribers prescribe any medications? Maybe Omar?
I'm really glad you brought this up. Yeah, okay, so we don't really do much in the way of production in the pharmacy, other than kind of adding water to powdered antibiotics and, you know, making it up correctly. So because making things is more done in a sort of professional lab setting these days, either one-off items, specially made items, or items made en masse, nice and cheaply, like paracetamol tablets, because it's all pretty much made in a sort of precise way. and hardly so in community pharmacy. We're not getting like mucky stuff and things all over ourselves. So the mechanical, like the main principle of wearing a coat is not really necessary. So I think that's the most practical answer to the question, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, a lot of patients probably find us more friendly if we're, wearing a shirt and tie rather than a white coat as well. But that's by the by, that's personal opinion. So hope that helps.
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
So in the UK, community pharmacy is really seen as a very, very good way for patients and the public to be able to interact with healthcare professionals. A lot of people have fear of going to the doctor, especially in the male population, and walking into a pharmacy is so easy to do. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of white coat syndrome. So if you measure the blood pressure of a patient in a GP practice, it's going to be different to their blood pressure if they're measuring it at home. So like Omar touched on there at the end, it's really about making the patient comfortable in the environment they're in. Some old-fashioned pharmacies still have it, but I know the BPSA has got a policy where they don't, they think it should be consigned to history. And the direction that pharmacy is going in is more like that. And even in a production facility, a white coat is not enough to protect an awful lot. So, yeah.
Thank you. And another one for you, Matt, is, do you happen to know how many years of experience are required to become a research and development scientist?
Yes, so the answer is 0. At the 77th BPSA conference, I met a formulation scientist from GlaxoSmithKline. At that time, I hadn't got this job yet, and I'd just been rejected by GSK. And I was really interested, how did you get into pharmacy? Because it's notoriously difficult in the UK to, well, supposedly notoriously difficult to do it in the UK. And their response was, I just applied for a job and, I got it. You just have to apply for the roles. You just have to show your transferable skills. The skill set that I developed in community pharmacy is applicable to lots of different things that I do in industry. And if you take an example of a research and development scientist, when somebody is deciding how to formulate a tablet or a solid dosage form, if you have the ability to think about that patient at the end and what that patient wants, do they want it to taste good? Do they want it to be a certain size? Are they going to be able to take it 3 times a day? If you think about those things and you have the ability to think about those things so early on, you're setting yourself apart from those that don't have that full web of scientific and clinical knowledge and understanding what a patient is and how a patient acts. You're setting yourself apart there. So I think something that somebody said to me was, if you don't apply for things, then you're not going to get anything. That's the only thing that's certain. So until you apply for it, you're not going to know. And through failing for interviews and stuff like that, you're going to develop and you're going to learn how to succeed. You're going to know what to look at, what you need to read. So yeah, just do some background reading and start applying.
Yeah, thank you. And a question for Omar, would you be able to talk a bit more about what medications tend to be dispensed in airport pharmacies and which ones can be dispensed with a prescription, which ones can be dispensed without a prescription?
Okay, so airport pharmacies probably, in terms of dispensary medicines, where you've got those prescribed medicines, I'm sure that's what you mean. Airport's not going to be your mainstay. I mean, airport pharmacy's got its own vibe to it. Like there's a vibe to transport hubs, which is very much like stations, but airports in particular, your patients don't live locally generally. I mean, they're flying from all around the world, and then they're going in the airport and then getting a train or a car way somewhere else. So it's unlikely you'll get presented with many prescriptions, to be honest with you. I mean, I think off the top of my head, you get pharmacy, you get airside and landside. Okay. So sort of either side of security, and some of them don't even have an NHS dispensing license. Like they don't even really dispense because they just don't get any like prescriptions or hardly any. So it's not worth it. So really it's all about what, medicines on the shop floor, items on the shop floor, and behind the counter stuff that people want to buy and then fly away with. But usually, say you've got a patient who's on regular blood pressure medicine or medicine to control their diabetes, what they tend to do is get that all done in advance, because you don't want to like risk it at the airport. Oh, I'm trying to get it dispensed and the pharmacy doesn't have my particular blood pressure medicine, and what do you do now because your flight's due in 2 hours? So most people don't do it that way. They get it dispensed where they live or where they work at a normal community pharmacy, get all their medicines ready, and they'll take a portion off and sort of wrap that up so it's labeled for security so people can check it, and then they keep that usually with their carry-on luggage. So the idea of getting prescribed medicine dispensed at an airport is quite rare, but people still want health advice, and they want, oh, I forgot my bite cream or my bite tablets, antihistamine tablets, what have you. They still want all that. So there's a role for pharmacy for sure, but it's not really dispensing, if that makes sense. So that's probably why some don't even have a dispensing license. So, hope that helps.
There we go. Thank you. So I think there's quite a few more questions we've got written down, but maybe I'll get some of the speakers to reply to those via email, if that's okay with everyone. So I'll note some of these down and we can get those answered in due course. I'll get that sent out to everyone. So I understand it's been 2 hours, 15 minutes, but I want to say a massive, massive thank you for attending. I'm going to send post on the chat the social media pages for the BPSA, and I think Seb is going to post the ones for IPSF on the chat. So be sure to follow those if you want to keep up to date with anything that BPSA or IPSF has got to offer. They've all been posted already, but anyway. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for coming. It was really, really great to see so many faces from all across the world, and I hope that you've learned a little bit more about the UK, different pharmacy sectors. Obviously it's very diverse, and as you've heard from everyone, it's a very dynamic field and lots going on at the moment, and everything's going to be posted. So we've recorded the session, so that'll be posted on the YouTube channel of the BPSA, so you'll be able to check that out in a few days, I should imagine. But other than that, thank you so much for attending, and it was really great to see you all, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Okay, I'm seeing lots of thank yous in the chat, so thank you so much everyone. Thank you.